Neat. Oh, hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
can hear you. Yeah. Sorry. I thought you were talking. Thought you were talking to chat, not to me. So,
Well, them too, I guess. Yeah.
yeah.
Bunch of deviants. I'm just very so good, so good. I'm a fan. I confess.
Appreciate that.
Well, no, I appreciate you. Is what's important. What I'm trying to say here is I appreciate you very much for doing this because you speak to my brain in a way that some of the other things don't. And so that's good. Can I ask you some? I'm going to ask you some questions coming at it from because I work on the server side usually, and
Sure.
and the one time I was like freebasing some PHP code, and I'm like, what if the server side was the client side, man?
Right.
And
Man.
then eventually I landed where you where you are. I think.
Right.
What like I guess. Well, first of all, I guess you should introduce yourself. But I'm just just
Oh no, all good. Yeah, it's all good, man. I'm just a dude. I write bad code just like everyone else. My name's Carson Gross. I teach computer science at Montana State University, and I created HTMX, which I think is what Josh primarily wants to talk about.
Yep.
Hey, what's up, Ted? I worked with Chitter Ted. I worked with Ted at
Really?
yeah, I worked with him at Guidewire, a company called Guidewire, believe it or not.
It's a very small world.
Yeah, it is a small world. I watch. He messes around with HTMX. It's funny. I tried to convince the company that we worked for to use the predecessor to HTMX, which was called Intercooler, and there was a whole big thing about this. It didn't work out, but so anyway, I work on some open source projects. I wrote an essay called grugbrain.dev, which you may have read that if you've ever read grugbrain.dev. Yeah, it's kind of a funny essay written as a caveman about programming. So that might be worth reading.
I'm going to go to Reddit. That's not a mistake, surely. It says grugbrain. Oh, it's literally a URL, grugbrain.dev. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. And what else? Live in Montana, obviously. It's very cold here today. It was 3.
Big sky country.
Yep. Very pretty, but very cold. I guess that's about it. It's kind of a good intro for me.
What was it? You said you're a professor. That's so cool, right? Like that is to me the hardest thing to do is to know something well enough to teach it.
I don't know about that, but it's fun. It's
why do that? I ended up like a rich, handsome billionaire, you know?
Well, so I tried being a rich anyways, billionaire. I started a company and like a good startup, and it was doing well. I wasn't gonna be a billionaire, but it was a good lifestyle business with a couple other guys, and it was doing well. We had a couple technical issues and some interpersonal issues, but we kind of had we kind of had the other 2 co-founders had a meltdown and couldn't get along with each other. So they forced me to sell the company along with them. Like we were all sort of 1/3 owners. And it was brutal because I was planning on that being my life, was just running kind of like the 37 Signals model, not as successful as them, but like that model of like, okay, just have software, it makes money and I can do whatever I want. But that didn't work out. And so when that melted down, I kind of was like, just as a joke, almost, I applied to teach at the Montana State because I was in Northern California. So I was born and raised in Northern California outside Sacramento.
Sacramento's great. Okay, you're down the street.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up out by Folsom Lake, if you know Folsom Lake.
For people who don't know or on the chat, I live in San Francisco. You can take an Uber to Sacramento. It's not a quick Uber. It's a few hours, but you can do it.
Yeah.
It's not that far, right?
It is. It was when I was growing up there, it was pretty rural. But it's a big city now. But we've been coming out to Bozeman a bunch. And I always liked Bozeman. It reminded me of Sacramento when I was younger. And so I've been pushing my wife to do it. She's a California girl too. So it does get a little brisk here. When I kind of had this like crisis of like having to sell my baby, I was like, I don't know, maybe I'll teach. And so almost as a joke, I applied to MSU to teach. And then right as like everything was coming to a sort of head, they emailed me back and were like, hey, we'd like you to come here and teach.
Well, that's great. So But I mean, but for real, like, you don't find that the act of having to be precise in your explanation helps you refine your understanding of the thing? Like,
Oh, absolutely. I've learned a ton since teaching. Like I relearned all of like basic computer science. Like the last 5 years has been really good for me learning
yeah,
how computers actually work. So it's been really good for me intellectually. And I, now I do intellectual, like I do academic papers on hypermedia and stuff like that. So it's all been good. The money isn't very good, but just it is what it is. You kind of pick what you
somebody
pick what your poison. So
that's what somebody explained it to me. Like, look, there's you can, what is it? You want to pick a job where you're adding more to the universe than taking from it. You know what I'm saying? Like
right.
if all you're doing is
Yeah.
making money, that's great for you, but are you adding to the
Right.
universe? Teachers and doctors and nurses are like, they add, and
Yeah.
yeah, good for you, man.
Yeah,
Not,
I like that. It's enjoyable, and there's I don't know, but there are definitely trade offs. So, but I like it at this point. I like Bozeman.
I've heard good things. I got a friend. Some of the people in the chat from the Java community might know Matt Rabel, and he's a legend in the community. He's from Montana. I think he's not even in Bozeman. He's like in the more rural parts of Montana.
Yeah, it gets real rural real quick around here, so you can be out in the sticks real quick.
For people joining from Romania and from Belgium and from wherever else in the world you're joining, just know Montana is like the emptiest state in the country. We call it Big Sky Country. You can go tens of miles and not see a soul, except for some bears. And, it's beautiful.
There's a terrible beauty to it, especially in winter. It's very cold. So it gets down and like it was minus 22 the other evening, and that's in Fahrenheit, which that's pretty
way worse.
That's pretty brisk. So, but you get used to it, and it is what it is. So.
Just stay inside and write code, I guess.
Yeah, well, you get like I like going outside in that weather because what happens is it's so cold, all the water drops out of the air, and so it's super pretty, and there's nobody out because so you don't want to do it for a long time, but it's really neat. It's really pretty when it gets like that. So
yeah, I mean, for people wondering, freezing is 32, right? I think 32 Fahrenheit. So when he talks about negative 20 something, that's brutal cold. Yeah, that's
it's pretty cold.
Tear ducts freeze up and stuff. Yeah, well, that's one thing. I would have thought that was the secret to your success with software. So you just had plenty of time in the winter to focus. Yeah,
that might be part of it.
I don't know. I could do snow because I've got like got the fur and the extra layer of blubber. I could do it, but my partner, she's a tropical creature, so I showed her. I showed her a photo of New York, and she gets shivers in the winter.
It's hard, and I think the sunshine too, like the lack of sunshine can grind on people, especially like Montana is split. We're actually Bozeman's on the other side of the Continental Divide, so we get a fair amount of sun here.
Right.
But the other side of the Continental Divide is, like, in my opinion, is even prettier. It's greener because there's a lot more water, but it rains all the time over there, and so a lot of people they see how beautiful it is and they move there and they're excited, and then it's just it can really grind on you because you don't get a lot of sun. So,
but you get tons in the summer, which is the opposite, right?
No, yeah, on that side, it can still be hard. Like you do get sun for sure, and it's beautiful when it's sunny because it's green and wet. Like Bozeman's on sort of the desert side. It's still pretty green here, but it's like high desert. So
I love this. You mentioned academic papers and stuff like that, and I kind of wonder. I mean, you have my money, okay? I bought the book. And I've even started to leaf through it, but my concern was that I already understood the basics, and I was scared that I would be repeating myself. But you can correct me today. This is what that's what this is to disabuse me of my idiocy.
Sure.
I'm a big fan of Roy Fielding's sort of work on REST when he talks about what REST is, and he always talked about hypermedia constraints. And there's a Dr. Leonard Richardson's maturity model, and he talks about a level what is it, 4, right? Zero.
Yeah, RMM level 3 is hypermedia
zero index.
Controls.
Yeah, and level 3 is hypermedia, right? Like, and there's 4 levels because it's 0 index. So level 3 is hypermedia. You've got links in the content that tell you where to go next. So the state is sent from the server to the client. They can sort of navigate that way. And I don't know. That all kind of resonated with me. So when I see you out there like saying, hey, what if the web was the web and we could actually control the client side, both the state and the user interface from the server?
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
That's the way it was designed. It's not the way it's often used these days, but that is the way it was designed. And that's what Fielding was talking about in his dissertation. For people that don't know, Roy Fielding was an academic who he helped build a lot of the original tools for the web. So like the Apache web server and things like that. And he designed, that little thing in the specification for HTTP, I think 1 and 1.1. And he wrote a dissertation for his PhD on the network architecture. It wasn't about the web's network architecture. It was about network architectures in general. And then in chapter 5, he analyzed the web in terms of these ideas that he came up with, as far as being RESTful and so forth. And so chapter 5 is where REST really was defined, that term REST, which you probably heard if you've done any web development. The Richard maturity model. I actually have an interview with that guy that I'm kind of trying to work through right now. I hope to do
an interview with him.
Yeah, I just emailed him and was like, hey, you want to talk about like what happened with the RMM? And so I put some questions up. I'm hoping he got halfway through it. I'm hoping he'll complete it soon and I can post that to the HTMX website. So,
dude, that's awesome. Dr. Leonard Richardson. That's super cool.
Yeah. No, I know. It's just like, I don't know, maybe I'll try. And he was like, yeah, sure. So,
you never know. Just talk to your heroes. This is how I got you. You were like super nice. Thanks for that, by the way.
Yeah, no, all good. I'm not like I'm just normal dude. So,
sure. All the time. You remember you saw that Christopher Walken, cowbell, SNL
right?
Yeah,
I don't know much.
I'm just a normal guy.
Yeah,
put my pants on one thing. Yeah,
exactly.
Make cool records.
So in any event, like that academic stuff has been, interesting to me. Like the last 5 years, it's given me a chance to sort of really think about what HTMX is as far as like the theoretical aspects and how it folds in with Roy Fielding's concept of REST and so forth.
Yeah.
I think you're right that it does push the focus of UI generation onto the back end. Like typically when people are working with HTMX as a front end technology, I guess like just to step back for people that are absolutely new and have no idea what we're talking about.
Good idea.
HTMX, what HTMX is it's a front end library. So it's something you include in your web application or website. And what it lets you do is put attributes on elements in your UI that are very similar to the href attribute from anchor tags or the action attribute in forms, where you say, basically, I want to issue an HTTP request to this place. And so what HTMX does is it generalizes that idea where you can have any event trigger an HTTP request, and it can take the response, which is also going to be in terms of HTML, and place it anywhere in the DOM, depending on how you want to set things up. And so that's really all that HTMX, it's not all that HTMX does, but that's the majority of it. And so it's not a super complicated library. I think you're right, Josh. Like you get it pretty quickly. If you've done traditional web development, it's pretty straightforward how it works, and that's intentional. But there's also, I think, even for older web developers who are really familiar with that model, the book covers a lot of theory, and you don't have to buy the book if you don't want to. It's available online for free. I appreciate that, but you don't have to. It's available online for free. The book does go into some of the theory, and I think kind of gives you it's a good refresher, maybe, particularly for older web developers who have done a bunch of work in like SPA style web apps and sort of been in that world for a while, to sort of like come back to, okay, this is the way the web originally worked. And at some level, this is the way the web was designed to work. How can we take that model and then do more interesting things? And so if you use HTMX, right, like what can you do? Well, you can sort of use that old model, but then you can do things like infinite scroll or like, lazy loading. Like there's a bunch of examples on htmx.org/examples you can look at of things that are possible to achieve using that model but with just the small number of attributes that HTMX gives you. And so it's sort of takes that old model and makes it, shines it up a little bit, makes it so that you can do a little bit more with it. And then what that can give you, particularly my understanding is you're a back-end developer, like a Java developer, right?
Yes, sir.
So for someone like you, what that means is rather than just being a dumb JSON API where you're like, okay, I'm just going to get the data access layer right, and maybe like deal with GraphQL or something like that. Instead, you have on the back end, you have complete control over your web app. You can build your web app in your back end. And so what that means is you collapse that front end back end distinction into you're just a full stack developer. And that's good in some ways and it's bad in other ways. The ways that it's good is that now you as a developer can have full ownership over a feature. So you don't have to coordinate with a front end team and they ask for an API change and then like 2 sprints later they get it and whatever, everything's there in one place. And so you have a lot more control. That iteration cycle can get really tight, which I think is good. And I think it's good, in general. I think it's better for developers. I think that, one of the problems whenever, what hell is other people, right? Like if you got to work with another person, even if they're a good person, like there's just communication and then they get sick or their kids got to get picked up for school or whatever. And so if you can just sort of merge that into like you're responsible for a feature rather than one part of one feature, it really does eliminate some of this friction. Now it's bad. And like, people will say, oh, HTMX is bad because your HTTP endpoints are specific to your web app. Like, because they're returning HTML. They're a bad general purpose data API, which is correct. Like that's correct. HTML has not proven very effective for general purpose APIs. And, but I think that's actually a good thing because people who try to use JSON APIs for both their web app as well as being a general purpose API, they always have this tension where you have to commit, and this is why JSON APIs are often versioned so heavily, because your web app needs like really specific things, and then your general purpose API wants to be general purpose. And that tension between those two things can cause sort of a psychotic situation where your JSON API is trying to be all things to all people. If you use HTMX, then your web app can just be HTML based and you can have a JSON API, and you separate those two concerns, and then your JSON API can be nice and stable for your clients. You don't have to version it as much. So anyways, there are more pros and cons, but I think that's that's what I see as the big pro for someone like you who really wants to work on the back end. Like, okay, HTMX will let you do that.
Well, it's not just that I want to work on the back end. It's that I should not be trusted anywhere near JavaScript. I'm not smart enough for that. So I quite like the look. All kidding aside, I'm fine in, I can sling some Vue and React and whatever. But even if you, let's say we're all equally good at both back end and front end, it's just hard on the brain to have to constantly jump logical boundaries like that. It's just weird. It takes a lot of time to add the thing. Like you said, adding a feature becomes this exercise in splitting your brain into two different personas, consumer and producer, and server.
Well, especially if you're committed to Java, right? Like this is the one thing that I like about HTMX is that if you use HTMX, you can use whatever technology you want on the back end. If you use a heavy JavaScript front end, there's going to be this pressure on you as a company, as an individual, and as a company, as a team to adopt JavaScript on the back end just to avoid exactly what you're just talking about. Like, why would I want to have this enormous JavaScript code base and then this enormous code base in another programming language? Why not just have one? And that was like, I think you saw that pressure from in like 2015-ish to probably about 2020. There was like a lot of pressure, like JavaScript was going to do everything. And JavaScript on the back end was going to take over everything, and you just have to accept it. And then there was TypeScript, because JavaScript maybe isn't the best programming language for like large structured applications and whatever. Whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But one thing that I appreciate about HTMX is that by collapsing all that complexity on the front end into just the hypermedia model, and you're going to have HTML. Like HTML, like, is it a programming language or not? I don't know, but you're going to have some HTML. So, okay, you can learn HTML.
Yeah,
But
even I can.
but then your back end is not going to be written in HTML. So you're going to have to pick some programming language, and it can be the one you want. So if you're a Java person, it can be Java. If you like Lisp or Haskell or OCaml or, Python or PHP or whatever it is.
It could even be JavaScript. It's still less work because you're just doing doing it once in the server side. I just love that. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just love that you extended HTML. It's just more of what we already know. And so suddenly you get these, it's HTML with superpowers, it's really good.
It's the idea of taking something that's already there and making it more expressive. And I got lucky. Like, I stumbled into that. I didn't really realize what I was doing at the time, but it's like HTML and hypermedia is a really good idea. And I didn't realize, maybe like in a really, what do I want to say? Like in a really abstract way, I realized, HTML is like not powerful enough, but it's been over time that I've developed this idea. Okay, HTMX extends HTML. Obviously, it's in the name HTMX. And what it's doing is it's making HTML more powerful in terms of being a hypermedia. It's taking the existing hypermedia controls. So hypermedia controls are things like links and forms, things that make requests based on user actions, and just making that more powerful. So like any event can trigger any type of request and place it anywhere in the DOM. And that, again, that doesn't sound like much, but it turns out with just doing that little bit, then you can do a lot more with your UI. And by being able to do a lot more with your UI, a much larger class of applications can be done purely in terms of HTML, which means you've collapsed a layer of complexity, right? Because in an SPA, you have your front end model, a router, a front end router, back end router, API, blah, 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 and JSON flying back and forth. And so you collapse like through two of those three layers on the front end. You just have, the browser now, and it's talking directly to your back end. And so you eliminate two layers of complexity.
And maybe at least one on the back end, because remember you said you have an API, and then you have the general purpose sort of, you have the view, and then they have the general purpose API. And I think that is like a adapter layer, a gateway or something to turn. And now maybe you can just get rid of that too. This middle.
Yeah, or like if you have a complicated GraphQL setup or something like that can all just go away. So, I mean, some people have had some really dramatic success using it. There's the guy, the Context Day demo from DjangoCon 2022, I think, maybe the European DjangoCon, where they moved from React to HTMX, and they reduced their code base size by 2/3 and went down to, it was 33% the size of what it was beforehand. And he said, I take his word for it, no fall off in user interactivity. Now, not every application is going to be like that. And I've got an essay up called When to Use Hypermedia, because some apps are very amenable to using hypermedia and some apps aren't. So, like I always give examples, like Google Maps would probably not be done very well with hypermedia because it's got a lot of events and you don't want requests going back and forth and so forth. But then like Gmail probably could be done really well with hypermedia. Not an offline Gmail, but like if you just wanted to do an online email client, you could probably do that pretty well with.
I confess, I was about to reach for Gmail when you said that, and now that I think of it.
Yeah. It doesn't work well for offline, but then a lot of stuff doesn't. Like, does email even work well for offline? Like if you're trying to send an email, I don't know.
Composition maybe, but and that's just it. So with HTMX, you have all these attributes that, like you said, they do they extend the verbs that the browser knows about to support other kinds of interactions with the back end. So you can have a delete on a form or options, whatever, and that's kind of nice. You can also do you can also make everything submit as opposed to just buttons.
Right. Yeah. Really just forms, but even buttons can't submit on their own. It's just forms and anchors. Those are the two user interactive hypermedia controls in HTML.
But you've extended it so that now basically everything can. I guess behind the scenes you let people write the attributes as though that would work, and then behind the scenes you send window that fetch kind of stuff, right?
It's basically just a really simple wrapper. It's a little long, it's a little bigger than I'd like it to be at this point, because history support it's got history support, which is sort of a nightmare. It's a JavaScript library. So, I do laugh, like people are like, oh, HTMX is for people that hate JavaScript. And that's true. There are people that hate JavaScript and use HTMX because of it. But HTMX is written in JavaScript. So at the very least, there's some irony there, which is pretty funny. But the way it works is it just sits in the background and watches for elements that have these annotations on them and hooks up, an event listener, and it does all that stuff behind the scenes for you. So you work typically in HTML. There are events and stuff like that, and people do use JavaScript in conjunction with HTMX. So I think if you want to build sophisticated HTMX applications, you're going to have to learn some JavaScript. But it certainly lets, particularly like the more simple and straightforward your web app is, the more you can get away with just straight HTMX stuff.
I would say I mean, you know best, surely, but I would say you could actually, not just simple, you could do fairly intermediate stuff without ever touching a line of JavaScript. You can, because everything can be swapped out in situ. So, so suddenly, I mean, a lot of the functional stuff that we try, all the cute stuff we try and do with the JavaScript and single page apps and all that, what is it doing? We're just updating state in an island of a fragment of HTML somewhere. That's right. I want that thing to turn the number to increment. That's not hard. I can just replace that island.
You can do quite a lot with it. And I think you can go a lot further than people suspect with it. Particularly people that are SPA developers, and they look at HTMX and they're like, oh, this is only for toy stuff. It's like, I don't know. You can do a fair amount with it. And it also, the other thing about HTMX is it makes the JavaScript that you do write much more high value. Right. Because, now we're not writing just reams of JavaScript for all the basic CRUD stuff or whatever. Instead, when I do write JavaScript, it's to achieve something that I really want. And so it makes the JavaScript actually more high value. And so I think I gave a talk at JS Nation this last year, and I talked about that. Like, I think HTMX in a sort of an ironic way is pro JavaScript, in that it makes the JavaScript that you write for your web apps much more high value. And so, that's good. It's good for JavaScript.
What I love about it is most apps, I think, if you, like we talk about progressive enhancement, right? Like the idea that, and there's all these problems that come because we do non-progressive enhancement. If we start with SPA first, then there's this whole category of problems like, well, how do I do server-side rendering? It just goes away. If you start with progressive enhancement, I have server-side rendered, and I'm going to add a little, I need some dynamism here or there, whatever. But it's not not my raison d'etre. It's just the thing I'm adding to this page that would have otherwise just been pushed post-back,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's much easier to get a lot of those things right. HTMX itself is, you have to do work when you're working with HTMX to make sure progressive enhancement works properly. But it's just much closer to the way the normal web works, and so it's just easier to make it work the right way. So I agree with that. And I don't know. I like hypermedia is a cool idea, and you can use it for quite a bit. You can use it for more than people suspect. Let's say
you get caching, you get security, you get all these layers, you get layering with filters and proxies.
It was funny when I was first talking about HTMX, I would get these SPA people, and I don't say that in a disparaging way, just people who, there's a whole generation right now of web developers who have never built like what I would consider a normal web app. Like they just don't know how forms and links can be, that's just, they grew up with React, or Vue or something like that. And so, one of the questions I would get is, how do you do security? Like, how do I add security headers? And I'm just like, you don't. Like, that's a cookie. That's a session cookie. Like there's, that's just the way, and that's just the way like normal web apps have worked for 20, plus years now. And so it is really, there's a big cultural disconnect too. And that's something I think HTMX is, I hope, helping with, is like reintroducing these young kids, like, hey, there was this old way to do things, and, you know, and it worked, and it was simpler in a lot of ways. And now there's a new way to work with that old, you know, in that old mode, but get more dynamic experiences. And maybe for some percentage of your application needs, that can be good enough. And then you can simplify that part of your web app. You know, it always depends, of course, but
if you can access the page, it's secure, right? Like if you can see it in the first place,
right,
you're already fine.
Totally. Yeah, I laugh sometimes because I don't know if you remember, you probably weren't following at the time, but there was a little bit of a moral panic around HTMX last year, like maybe July or something like that, because you probably know this, but with HTML, you have to escape user content. You have to make sure that people can't enter HTML content that like breaks your rendering, and there's security issues associated with that. And that's called broadly, that class of security issues is called cross-site scripting issues. So XSS is for whatever reason what it's been called. So, so people were, you know, they were freaking out about how, HTMX is insecure. And I'm like, well, you know, there are security concerns for sure. And we've got a pretty good essay up on it on the website that you can read, and in the docs, there's a good section on it. But then, you know, also with these GraphQL APIs, right? Like securing a GraphQL API is hard. like it's really hard to do. It's very easy to send data you shouldn't, and it's very easy to give people access to things they shouldn't have access to. Facebook actually has a whitelist of GraphQL queries that you're allowed to execute in their system, is my understanding. At least this was last time I looked at it, this was a situation. And I'm like, okay, so all you guys who are freaking out about XSS, like, do you freak out about GraphQL security issues? Like, probably not, you know, like, so I don't know. It is what it is, but
it is. I work on the Spring team. We have a technology called Spring Security, and for most of people's interactions with Spring Security, it'll be in terms of the HTTP filter, right? And that's sort of how it works. For the GraphQL stuff, we actually had to secure method invocation. That's the only way we could granularly stop people from calling a particular endpoint. But I think you could still enumerate an endpoint, right? You could still see that is there.
Well, and you, like, I think my understanding, again, I'm not a GraphQL expert, but my understanding is you have to get down to like column level security, because, you know, like even if you do like a sort, like if you let someone accidentally sort on salary at a company and like get all the employees sorted by, like, you know, you could like, you can allow data to escape in some pretty sophisticated or like hard to detect ways. Let's say that. But, you know, again, I'm not a GraphQL expert. I don't want to say GraphQL isn't secure. It is, but it's hard from what I can tell. It's hard to do. And similarly, HTMX has security issues associated with it. You just have to kind of learn how security on the web works. And so
pros and cons. Sounds good.
And that I think is an example of some knowledge that people used to have, and to us old guys doesn't seem like a big deal. But then the new, you know, the young people, they see this and freak out. And it's like, it's okay. It'll be all right.
I wrote CGI bin in C. I'm telling you, people don't know. Okay, so one of the things I loved about HTMX is, even though you've got all these features, including history management, as you just pointed out, you just put out a thing pretty recently saying basically what it won't be, and sort of this is what the end of the line looks like, right? Like, and your plan to help contribute to standardization, sort of like
we're hoping to contribute to actually get some of the ideas of HTMX in HTML itself. So that's a separate project, but
planned obsolescence in the best way. That's awesome.
Right. Yeah. HTMX will keep working the way it works today forever. So, you know, there's a talk that one of the team members on the HTMX team, Alex Petros, gave a talk called the 100-Year Web Service, where he talks about how to build websites that are around forever. And a big part of that is just backwards compatibility. Like JavaScript written 20 years ago, as long as you're not relying on libraries, right?
Oh, yeah,
Just
okay.
vanilla JavaScript written, a long time ago will continue working. And there's been a lot of stabilization of the DOM APIs. DOM APIs are backwards compatible now. They're going to be there forever. They keep, even deprecated things, they keep not removing them. And so, I think HTMX is trying to slot into that vibe of like, okay, you're not going to get left behind. This is an approach to building software. It's an architecture rather than something that you have to update. And we're going to reinvent the world every 3 or 4 years. Like, this is a way to build websites that's going to be stable for the foreseeable future and hopefully for the next 100 years, if not longer. So it's an ideal. It's an ideal. It might not be realistic, but it's an ideal.
It's possible. I mean, I work in the Java community. This year, the language is 30 years old. You can take a program written in Java 1, run it in Java 23, and it runs just fine. It's possible to do 30-year-old things, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's true as well. Hold on.
No, you're good.
There's a ambulance.
Sure.
Anyway, I sort of wonder about for me, the JavaScript. If you're on the SPA side, obviously your framework's going to break every few years. But what breaks more often than that? The build itself, right?
Right.
Like, there's 5 for every one framework. There's 3 or 4 builds. It seems like in the JavaScript world.
Yeah.
So for me, looking at HTMX, I don't even need npm to install. It's just one library. Just add that script tag, and I'm fine. And that can be, in the Java world, we have this thing called WebJars, which is at first a little nauseating to think about, but what it is it lets you reference JavaScript libraries through the packaging system of a Java.
Right, through Maven.
Yeah, Maven. Oh, okay, so.
Yeah, I know Java pretty well.
I'm so sorry.
I know Java pretty well. No, it's all good.
No, it's good. It works fine. But the point is, I can just WebJars I don't even need to maintain the build in JavaScript. I can just use the same stuff I know from 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's another sort of focus of HTMX is having an extremely simple build system. Like, we don't really have a build system, and you don't have to use HTMX via npm, as Ted just pointed out, if you don't want to. It's just one file. It's dependency free. There's no, you can use it unminified. Even I actually think unminified JavaScript is. I really like it because then you can debug it. Like, that's the thing to me. Like, I'm a big fan of debugging, and if you minify, there's this culture of minification in the JavaScript world where they take JavaScript. Often they have TypeScript, which gets transpiled into JavaScript and then minified, and then and then compressed. Yeah, and then you have to have source maps, exactly. So you have to have this mapping between here's what the code looks like and here's what the whatever looks like. And now that's another thing that you have to ship around with it. I think one of the big advantages of JavaScript is that it was a source-oriented language, and you could see what was going on there. Like, you can debug it and so on and so forth. And so I think HTMX is trying to move back from this really build heavy world that has developed in the JavaScript world to a simpler model where it's like, here's a JavaScript file and there's no modules or whatever. You just include it in your web page and it does stuff, and that's it. There's
no module. You just add a script tag. That's crazy. Who would do that?
Yeah, right. It seems convenient to me, but for whatever reason, people have decided to move away from that, and so HTMX is a move back.
I'm all for it because I'm the old. Hey, look. Oh, here we go. This guy's he gets it. 100%. Okay.
Hate's
question.
A strong word, but
you don't have to hate JavaScript. You can hate the state of its system. Sure.
Yeah. Sure.
So maybe you have answers for these. I don't know. I haven't arrived yet.
I know. I'm happy to answer these questions if you want.
Yeah, a few of them. I have a question first. It's all about me here.
Yeah, of course.
What about mobile? Like, if I'm going to build my iOS app or Android or whatever.
Right. Well, I think you've got two choices. Well, actually, let's say three choices. The first one is to say, okay, create a web app that, works well on mobile. That's doable for some class of mobile applications. I think in my experience, I'd rather use a mobile app if it's feasible. I'd rather use a mobile web app than have to install a mobile application. Maybe that's just because I'm old school or whatever. So, but I think that's feasible for some certain class of some class of applications. The second option is, okay, just suck it up and create a separate API that's optimized for your mobile app, and then build a real mobile app. If you have a good model, so you're a Java guy, so like if you have a good model layer, then tying a JSON API to that model layer is no more or less difficult than tying a web app, request to that model layer. And, you have the advantage then that your mobile app and your web app aren't tied together on the same HTTP endpoints. They're in different places. And so they can evolve separately, and whatever you need for your mobile app, you can put there, and you don't have all the security concerns and whatever. So I think those are both very reasonable options. The third option would be
you're still saving yourself an extra layer in that SPA stuff for the mobile app.
You are, but you're paying for it when you need it, in my opinion. So, and then the third option is actually covered in our book, which is Hyperview, which is a hypermedia oriented mobile application system. A little different than HTMX, but that's set up to try and take advantage of some of the pros of hypermedia, but do it in a way that isn't as hamstrung as the browser is. So it's more oriented towards the mobile world. So, I think those are three options that you have. None of them are perfect. Certainly none of them are no work. They're all work.
But
darn it. It is. Yeah, exactly. It's work, so it's not, there's no HTMX thing that's going to snap its fingers and you get a mobile app for free. So, but that's not what HTMX is. It's the, it generalizes hypermedia controls, and that's pretty much it. So,
and I think you could probably get a iOS app with a view pointing to the web app.
People do stuff like that all the time. It just, again, it depends on what your mobile app needs to do. So.
Okay. And then, by the way, HTML, the thing that really changes from web to mobile is the form and function of it's the shape. It's the dimensions of that CSS is great at that. And that doesn't change whether you're using HTML or SPA, it's.
If you want to get into like local access, like you need to access local things, although the browsers are getting better at that kind of stuff. But like drag swipes and things like that, those are the sorts of things that, like, if you really want a lot of that, then it might be worth looking at a mobile specific solution. So, but again, to me, it's a case by case basis. So,
okay, and then other, I don't know. What do you think about web? I don't know if I understand this question. What if you? Here, I'll just drop it in your lap, and you can make it work or not.
Yeah. So, what do you think about web components? This kind of developer UX I'm missing when I work out of React projects. So I'd love to see server rendered applications in some way. So, there's two separate things there. There's components, and then there's web components. If you're used to working with front-end components, let's split that into two questions too. First of all, one of the things that I have to say is just there's no way around it, is that React has a lot of off-the-shelf components that are available to you. So Shad CN or whatever it is, there's just a bunch of copy and pastable things that you can just drop in and to a React project, and they just work. And that is something that has come about not because of React, but because of the React ecosystem. It's been around forever, and Facebook and blah, blah, blah. So HTMX does not have anything like that, and HTMX will never have anything like that, at least that's associated with HTMX directly. And so there are component systems you can use that work well with vanilla HTML. So like lit is an example, but there are others where you can grab components and use them in just a more plain HTML infrastructure. So that's one part of that. The second part of it, when you talk about components, is like sort of these reusable chunks of code. When you're in a server context, you can still have reusable chunks of code. They're typically done in some sort of templating language, though. And so you include something in multiple places. And so that general idea of reuse exists in template languages, but it's not as formal as it is with components in the React system. And so I think there's actually an opportunity there for template languages to introduce things like components and make that part of the back end system. That's one thing I think HTMX is going to do, is drive some innovation in the templating world. And so that's one area.
Yeah.
So that's the component side. Let's talk about web components specifically, because that's the built-in browser technology for doing components. My general take on web components is that they are too heavyweight, and they try to sandbox the component a little too much from the DOM. And I think because of that, they can be difficult to work with. And so that has hindered their adoption. And I don't have any strong opinions beyond that. That's just, as a non-expert in web components, that's my opinion on them, is that they unfortunately they seem like they're a little too difficult to work with to get broad adoption. But that could change, so I'm hoping that there are more sort of vanilla HTML components that become available over time, because that is a big reason why a lot of people stick with React, is just all the off-the-shelf things. It's just too bad that's just tied so tightly to React, to something that's like a specific approach to building web apps. So.
In the totally different take side of that, there's in the Java Spring community, there's a gentleman named Thomas Schuley.
I know him.
Forgive me if I'm bastardizing your name, Thomas. But he's got this great framework that builds a top Spring boot that allows you to, on the server side, you keep Java components, and then they have corresponding fragments of HTML that work nicely with things like HTMX. Not exactly what you're talking about.
No, I think it's the idea of like, okay, if we can do components on the client side, we can do them on the server side. Like we can make that work. So I think it's possible. Maybe not stateful components. Someone asked about Java server faces, which was an older Java technology, if people remember that. And I think from what I remember of Java server faces, the problems that I ran into with it was that it had a lot of state on the server side. I tried to maintain basically a DOM on the server side, DOM-like thing on the server side. So that was a distinction that I saw. And like with HTMX, it's more the stateless web way of doing things. So
love it. I don't know. I'm trying to be mindful of your time. I appreciate that there's a upper bound here. So as we wind down here, Professor Gross, where are you on the internet? And if so, do you want to be found? And if so, where can people find you? By the way, Twitter is hysterical. The funniest tech Twitter. Period. Full stop. Bar none. Not even close.
It is pretty fun. Like, I don't know. I grew up on the forums back in the early 2000s, the late 90s and early 2000s, and it was just all what's that? Slashdot was on Slashdot. Got owned by Commander Taco a couple times, stuff like that. And so it's funny because I'd always been pretty silly on Twitter back when when HTMX was called Intercooler previously. Yeah, I had been kind of silly, but I had been sort of serious too. And then I think it was last year when the book came out, or maybe it was 2 years ago now. It'd been a blur. We were releasing the book and HTMX was starting to get some traction. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go crazy on Twitter and see what happens, just to try and get people to notice HTMX. And I have to say, it's way better to be lucky than good, because it worked. It worked really, really well. And so I've been continuing to just have fun and be funny. I think it's a good vibe. I like being funny. And so it's fun. I like it.
I love it. So where is that? I mentioned Twitter. Is that a real place? I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's what x.com now, which I'm not a big fan of, but x.com/htmx_org
Okay.
is the Twitter account. So
HTMX_org.
yeah.
If you're going to go onto that cursed app, this is the one account to follow. I would.
Yeah. I am on Blue Sky, but I need it's htmx.org on Blue Sky. I'm trying to figure out a way to cross post because it's really hard right now to like use both. So I don't know. I'll try and figure it out.
I bit the bullet. I've just been doing the copy and paste and then change the references if I need to. It's horrible.
Yeah, you can also, like, if you want to catch up, you can go to htmx.org/essays/lore, LORE.
Wait.
I get htmx.org/essays and then /lore. I'll put it in the chat. And this kind of like goes over some of the like the long running jokes like that are, just coming. Okay. I don't know. I can't post it, but maybe you can post it. Some of the like to understand the jokes on the Twitter account. Typefully, I'll look into that, Ted. That might be interesting. I got to figure that out. Yeah.
Sorry. Oh my goodness. It's
Deshaun. I don't live in St. Louis. That's a funny story. The way I became a St. Louis fan was I lived in Northern California, and I'm a little league. Like, I love baseball, and I coached little league. I've coached all my kids in baseball. And in California, it was impossible to get the Giants, the Angels, the A's, the Dodgers, or the Padres. And so you had to pick, like, those always just went first. They were hard to get. And so I had to pick team, and I had always admired the Cardinals. Just because I was a Giants fan, and so they were always really good, and I liked the way they ran their organization. So I had a bunch of Cardinals hats from coaching on the Cardinals, and then MLB TV wouldn't let me watch the Giants live, but they would let me watch the Cardinals live because it was out of market, and so I ended up becoming more of a Cardinals fan than a Giants fan. So that's how I ended up. I've never been to St. Louis. I got contacted by the Cardinals. A guy in the IT department or in the programming department at the Cardinals saw an interview and was like, "Hey, you're a Cardinals fan. You should come down and we'll look at see the stadium." So, but yeah, I've got no connections whatsoever with St. Louis. I do want to go there someday, catch a game. It'd be cool.
So can I get back to a second? HTMX at HTMX.org on Blue Sky is the CEO of Cross Posting. It's got 173 followers. There's another one that is like HTMX.Blue Sky that has like 1,000, and they're following.
Yeah, that guy's not. I don't know what that guy is. I think he just jumped on HTMX because it was my name.
Well, so is the guy that is HTMX.bsky.social is not you?
That's not me.
Oh my goodness!
I'm at HTMX.org.
Okay, I'm glad we had this conversation because the first one is followed by a lot of people in the community, like Wes Bowes and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm old and slow, and so I didn't register it. I didn't register it. I was like, "What? There's another thing? I don't know, man." And so, unfortunately, like, it is what it is. Hey, there's Thomas.
Cool. Yeah, just said hi.
So
dope. Yeah, Laura. Okay, we posted the links. I'm gonna wait. Let's do a quick selfie. Just pretend like you're happy. Smile. Okay, ready, steady, thank you. Okay, I'll use that for the video podcast thing.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I hate how I look smiling. I wish that's why I'm always grimacing in my photos. I'm just like, I look stupid.
I thought you were an actual unicorn, so I'm.
Not actually a horse. So.
Okay.
It's all good, Thomas. You're good.
Yeah, you can watch the replay. It was great. Like, Okay. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. And Josh, if you want ever have me come on and talk about specifics, like if you want to look at Java code or whatever, you just let me know. I'd be happy to come on and do it.
Consider this heck yes. Let's do a secondary visual stream without just a podcast audience in mind. I have jury duty next week. Hopefully I don't have to. I'm like tentative. If I don't, we could do it next week. Hell yeah. Let's go.
Okay. Yeah. Just let me know.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye,
Yep.
everybody.
See everybody.